Welcome everyone to this session on the power of grassroots voices to shape effective climate policy. My name is Margaret Arnold. I work at the World Bank. I'm based in Washington, DC, and I am the bank's global lead on the social dimensions of climate change. I'm going to be the moderator for this 90-minute session. And as people are logging on, let me just go through the Zoom etiquette and protocol that we'll be following. Just to let you know, this is being recorded. Just to let you know that, and also it will be available on the Huairou Commission and Slum Dwellers International websites and social media later in case you wanted to share it with people. It would be helpful for those online to close any other applications like Skype and things to, I think that helps with bandwidth, I'm not sure, but I'm supposed to say that. We will be mainly speaking in English, but we do have translation available in Spanish. We have one speaker from Brazil who will be speaking in Spanish. So you have a button on the bottom of your screen, you should around that says interpretation or translation or something, and you can click the channel that you want to listen to, Spanish or English. Please, if you have the power to, I don't know if participants can unmute themselves, but if please stay on mute unless you are speaking to avoid background noise. And I would really encourage people to use the chat box for comments and questions as you're listening. And we have, you know, a nice team here of technical support and people that will be monitoring the chat. So please put in the chat if you're having any technical issues. Just to let you know also that this session is part of Development and Climate Days, which usually takes place in the COP face-to-face. So this is, I think, the first time it's being done virtually. So it's nice that it's still taking place, even though we're not meeting at a COP. And it's obviously part of understanding risk. It's organized by IIED, by SDI, and the Huairou Commission. So thanks to all the organizers for putting this together. As you're coming into the meeting, please also feel free to type your name, organization, where the country you're connecting from today so we know who we're talking to. And again, I really encourage you to use the chat function to react to what you're hearing with comments, questions, or ideas. I think this is one of the nice things about virtual meetings. You know, it not only saves scarce resources on travel and reduces our carbon footprint, but it allows us to have parallel conversations and more engagement and deepen the dialogue. So please, let's make good use of that. The session today will be exploring how grassroots movements and decision makers engage and learn from one another in order to formulate and implement policies and programs that are responsive to communities and to the priorities of those, particularly those who are historically marginalized from public planning processes. We are extremely fortunate to have with us today 4 dedicated and very experienced community organizers and grassroots leaders. And they will be sharing their reflections and strategies for building relationships and partnerships with government and other stakeholders to inform policy and planning processes related to resilience strengthening. We're going to dedicate the first half of our session to a discussion with our grassroots leaders. The second half will broaden out the conversation by bringing in some key institutional partners to hear their perspective on what they heard and how we can learn from these partnerships to ensure that climate policies and programs respond to grassroots realities on the ground. For any of you among the participants that have participated in the community-based adaptation, the 14th CBA conference that took place back in September, this can be considered a sort of follow-on conversation to that, where we also learned about the strategies that grassroots communities are using and the smart climate solutions they're bringing. We talked a lot in that session around trust and relationships, and I think that will be a strong focus in our dialogue today. So without further ado, let me kick off the conversation with our grassroots leader. I'm going to turn first to, and I'll be introducing people as they come in to speak. And our first guest is Violet Shivutse. Violet is the founder and coordinator of the Shibuya Community Health Workers, and she is also the chair of the Huairou Commission Governing Council. She's a grassroots women leader and founder of the Shibuya Community Health Workers and has led community-led processes that position grassroots women as key actors in influencing policies on land, on agriculture, and basic services. So we're really happy to have you here, Violet. And I would love if you could kick us off by talking about when you're working with communities, doing risk mapping and discussing risk and resilience, how do you discuss underlying vulnerability issues like land access, environmental degradation, climate change? And so how and when do you introduce climate science into these community discussions, and what has worked for you at the community level?
Thank you so much, Margaret. Thank you for all the participants that are listening to me today. I hope I am audible enough. Am I audible enough?
Yes. Yes, you are.
Okay.
You're great.
Yes, you're great.
Thank you. So I want to start by saying that Shibuya Community Health Workers is a member of Huairou Commission, which is a global movement of grassroots women-led organization. And we are federated from the bottom, from village level, sub-location level, to every level of organizing. So when we begin in any location that we want to start working on issues of climate change, we have a tool that we have been using that we call vulnerability mapping. In vulnerability mapping, we mobilize the community to understand that climate change is an issue. We learn from the experience of the community, and then we are able to actually engage in a collective way of saying, we need to interrogate this issue. We need to interrogate the potential of what communities are doing and even understand the vulnerability status of the community. So when we conduct community mapping, which is often led by the grassroots women that are championing the resilience activities in the community, we usually speak to the leaders in the communities who are like leaders from the agricultural department. We speak to the community chiefs, we speak to traditional leaders, we also speak to women themselves. And this is the first way of engaging the community in a dialogue to start thinking of a problem that we are experiencing. All of us know that one of the biggest implications of climate change in rural communities is usually the change of pattern in farming communities. So we have usually change in seasons of planting, which really affects us as farmers. We also have other things that come like army fallworms, some diseases and pests that just start arising in community, which makes it very difficult for us to start to do our farming practices. As grassroots women, one of the things that has really been an issue for us is being able to access women land rights. Like, for example, I want to give an experience of the mapping that we conducted, the risk vulnerability mapping that we conducted, which showed that grassroots women are vulnerable when it comes to accessibility to land. Most of the activities we do that promote resilience in our communities are activities that we do, for example, for 3 years, for 2 years, and some of our activities are actually practical ways of improving the soil using our indigenous knowledge by doing mulching, doing vegetative crop covers, agroforestry, and many things. And in most communities where women do not access land, this is actually a big problem for you to start working on building resilient communities when land does not belong to you. But you cannot just come up and start telling the leaders that women need land to farm. You must begin somewhere. So we always begin with mapping. So when we conducted community mapping to ascertain the magnitude of how women are not accessing land, to get recommendations from women on the opportunities for women getting land, like succession, land lease, and many other problems, many other ways that women can be able to use to access land. We actually came up, like, for example, in the last year, 3 years, women who do not have land, or women who have very small land and want to do agricultural business, and they're impacted with climate change, they want to start with soil rehabilitation. They need to have land for like 3 years, which the recommendation was land leasing is a quicker option for women to start getting land, even when they are going through the procedure of succession, which takes long. Land leasing, when you have money, is quick. But it has been faced with many challenges. And in our mapping, we were able to identify some of the conflicts, how women have lost money in the name of land leasing, and all these purposes. So after we did this kind of mapping, we came up with a process of developing community-driven land lease guidelines, and we did a consultative process that engages the community. This is where we change on how we position ourselves as women, from being just people that are crying helpless to actually being able to find solution that can be able to even help the larger community, and that the government can listen to and be able to advance our tools and practices that we have been using. So that is how we began responding to the issues in relation to soil rehabilitation and management. And we were able to come up with 2 documents. One document was a community-driven land lease guideline that is now being adopted by our county government to become a legal framework that can advance accessibility to land without conflict. And then for us to be able to advance this tool, we came up with another tool like this one that I'm sharing here now. This is a tool that we call a facilitators manual that we are using to train the women who want to educate, to start working on land leasing in their community, so that they can be able to engage policymakers. They can be also able to engage the entire community in streamlining how land governance is happening in communities. So once we have this kind of tools, and we have grassroots women that are trained as trainers, which we call TOTs, then we are able to expand these practices. We are able to expand even the vulnerability mapping, because like this tool explains right from how do you start doing a consultation in the community? How do you do mapping in a community? How are you able to carry community feedback meetings that are disseminating the information? And how do you document? How do you launch a process that now the community has to begin bringing a solution on the table? So for now, this is what I will share. That is what we have been doing. Yeah.
Great, thank you, Violet. And I think your message of formalizing the role of women, as you're saying, not just crying for help, but them being trained and invested in as knowledge holders and key stakeholders and partners for dialogue. So that goes to the issue what we're talking about of building partnerships. So in looking at that, can just give us, if you could just give us 1 minute. I know there's a lot to say, but so how can investments in climate accelerate these systems and capacities that you're building, accelerate these grassroots actions? And if you can also just touch really quickly on, you're dealing with multiple risks, and now COVID has come. Have there been any changes or any other lessons in dealing with the COVID pandemic as well? Violet has disappeared from my screen. I don't know what happened to the connection. but maybe we'll move on to the next speaker, if that's okay, and then we'll come back to Violet when she can reconnect.
Yeah.
So let me bring in Nereide. Nereide Segala Coelho is a grassroots leader and the vice president of the Ser do Sertão Cooperative and part of the fiscal council of the Pintadas network of cooperatives in Salvador de Bahia, Brazil. Nereide has received awards from Brazilian President Dilma Rousseff for her contributions to the Adapta Sertão project and has been working for many, many years on climate change and resilience practices. And we're really glad to have Nereide here with us. I'm going to ask all of my questions to Nereide in one go because she's going to be speaking in Spanish and has some slides to show some images of what they're working on there. So if you need to change channels, you can do that when she starts speaking. So Nereide, thanks for joining us today. If you could tell us how your organization has addressed the issue of water scarcity and agricultural production in your region and built partnerships with local government to influence their policies. If you can, in that, also tell us how you've been dealing with the COVID-19 pandemic and how you think local and national governments could work with grassroots groups to go beyond consultations, but to create solutions and implement them together. Thanks, Nereide. Over to you.
Buenos dias, eu sou Nereide Segala, vice-presidente da cooperativa Ser do Sertão. Eu vou falar a partir do Brasil, não? Que o Brasil é um continente, e da região semiárida do Brasil, que vive 22 mil pessoas. E com isto, nós podemos dizer que o território ele é um período úmido e outro de sequía constante. Dos anos antes de 1990, as pessoas levavam água das águas artificiais às suas casas e para beber, cozinhar e lavar e limpar. As sequías recorrentes aumentavam o gasto público para a distribuição de água com o carro-pipa e assim não era suficiente. Com a igreja se construiu em Pintada as primeiras 4 cisternas de captação de água do teto. E se hizo cálculo de quantos gastos de recurso público o carro-pipa e se comparou com a política de recosecha de água de la lluvia. A quem são as principais interessadas em ter água em sua casa? São as mulheres, por a responsabilidade que elas assumem com sua família de buscar as águas. 3 tipos de tecnologia para a recoleção de água de la lluvia. A primeira, la 1, onde mostra a cosecha de água de techo, na cisterna de 15 mil litros de captação de água. La 2, la figura 2, que é cisterna de lluvia de inundação, com 50 mil litros de água que serve para as pequenas agriculturas. La 3, la figura 3, a construção de lagos artificiais pequenos, médios e grandes, garantizando água da região para de 2 a 3 anos. A estratégia de base, a estratégia com tecnologia de produção alternativa, inovadora, introduziu-se a irrigação, a indústria de processamento de alimento, criação de animais, galinhas, ovelhas, vaca e abejas. A produção agrícola não era suficiente. Os agricultores disseram que o tempo ha cambiado. Se sembreia, pero não se cosecha, não se produz de forma constante. Buscamos apoio na Universidade de Califórnia para identificar se realmente o tempo havia cambiado. Se isso, a inversão e se comprovou o efeito do câmbio climático. Com a investigação, en mano, dialogamos para construir políticas públicas. La demanda de política pública no respondía al cambiante realidad climática. Y los lagos artificiales no se llenaban debido a la reducción de la lluvia y la producción agrícola disminuyendo. As bases, através do conhecimento empírico, são capazes de identificar que avanços tecnológicos necessitam. O conhecimento empírico necessita do conhecimento científico para garantizar que inovações tecnológicas e entender o câmbio climático. Construir resiliência é um processo de largo prazo. Hemos trabalhado durante 30 anos para lograr a recolhição de água, a tecnologia de produção, indústria de processamento de alimentos, investigação científica, a eletricidade rural e a telefonia. Durante o Covid-19, podemos comprovar que nosso sistema de produção é realmente frágil, porque nós não logramos dar resposta produtiva que seja necessário de quantidade e qualidade de alimento. Logo, os 30 anos de trabalho, vemos que temos muito logro, organizações, políticas públicas, tecnologia para a produção agrícola. Sin embargo, isto não é suficiente. Hemos aprendido que devemos acelerar nossas ações estratégicas para reduzir o efeito do câmbio climático. O câmbio climático nos exige planificar nossas produções agrícolas e criar estratégia unificada, onde logramos geração de conhecimento, adquirir tecnologia para a produção, criar políticas públicas enfocadas em reduzir o efeito do câmbio climático. O câmbio climático está avançando em um ritmo acelerado, por lo tanto, devemos investir em conhecimento, habilidade e capacidade das mulheres de base para acelerar a resiliência climática. Devemos atuar com rapidez, com inversões a nível local e criar as condições que apoiem as ações de adaptação e resiliência lideradas pelas mulheres, pelas organizações de mulheres de base. Muitas graças.
Gracias, muito obrigada, Nereide. Thank you so much. I think one thing that comes out from Nereide's intervention is that these are long-term investments, very long-term. She's talking about 30 years and more. And given the urgency of climate change, we need to be making these investments and scaling them up. So now from rural areas in Brazil, we're going to jump back over to the African
I'm so
continent.
sorry, I'm back.
Okay, thanks, Violet. We'll come back to you, okay? We're going to go to Nancy Njoki, who's going to talk about an urban context. Nancy is a social activist and grassroots leader from Muungano wa Wanavijiji, which is a national federation of slum dwellers in Kenya. Nancy has supported communities to partner with the government on slum upgrading projects, building strong relationships, and helping communities to strategize, budget, plan, and implement projects. Nancy, thank you very much for joining us. It would be great to hear from you how you change the perception of government or other entities towards grassroots leadership, towards giving communities a substantive role. And yeah, well, let's start with that one. Over to you, Nancy.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you perfectly. Great.
So thank you so much. I'm Nancy from Muungano wa Wanavijiji, Kenya. This is a federation of grassroots communities. And basically what we do is to organize communities into savings groups at settlement level, where they are able to identify and also to advocate for the issues which are affecting them. So on the question of how we are able to change the perception of government and other stakeholders. So as the communities in the grassroots, we've been able to change how the government perceives us. This has been through continuous mobilization and how we organize our communities. We've been organizing our communities to be able to identify, prioritize, and seek intervention for issues which are affecting us. So one of the major issues which we've been able to, which has given us a plus in change of perceptions, is with the Mukuru SPA, where Mukuru was declared a special planning area. This was also through our data collection and taking the data to the county government so that they were able to declare it. So after the declaration, we've been able to work together with the government and leading a community-led planning for the development of the area. So recently, we've been able to do the road network, which was 100% done by the community with the government officials just doing what the community has drawn. So the community drew the road network, and currently the government is undertaking the project. So now through this continuous engagement and partnering with the government, we've seen that the perception of government towards the community has changed. And nowadays they are seeing the communities as equal partners and people with views which can be used for the development of their settlements.
Great, thank you so much, Nancy. Can so you're talking about, you know, communities taking an active role and the government's recognizing that and starting to trust them. Can you talk a little bit about the flip side of how policymakers and government entities, what can they do to build trust? What has worked? What have you seen in your experience? And I'd also like to throw the COVID-19 question to you as well. If you could share a little bit about how the communities you're working with have coped with the pandemic.
So as communities in the grassroots, we've been through this continuous engagement. This is where the government can be able to trust the government. So we've been having the ongoing conversations with communities in the areas of priorities. So this makes the government have policies which are not oppressive to the communities. And also the government should consider communities' views as critical. So I also think they should support and also should implement the community proposed programs. So with this, we'll have programs which are community owned, and also the sustainabilities of the project will be more. So I also think the government should also tap into the community's knowledge. They should realize that the community has local knowledge, which is key to solving their issues. So like an issue like flooding, communities have ways. Maybe they will identify the sewer system, who is to vacate a few rooms here and there. So using the community members to give their views and taking their views seriously, this will help. Also, they should improve the ownership of community in the programs they are implementing, and also continue having the bottom-top approach. So like the Muungano wana Vijiji, during this COVID season, most of our communities have suffered. Most of them do not have jobs, no businesses. But what as an alliance, as the Kenyan Alliance, we were privileged to be involved in the national government response team, COVID response team. So in this response team, our role was to monitor and fill in surveys for the weekly situations in the villages. This was done by the leaders in the communities. So we were the ones who are monitoring the COVID situation and giving feedback to the government. And also we were requested to identify the vulnerable people in the community in Nairobi, Naivasha, and Kisumu. So we did identify and give the government a list of 30,000 communities. So these 30,000 members, they were given cash transfers for more than 4 months. We also partnered with different organizations, and with these organizations, we were given food supplies to give to our communities. Also, we were given the sanitizers, masks, and also we were facilitated to do community awareness in the pandemic season. So, and we are still doing that. We are still doing community awareness, and we are still doing some food hampers when we are given by different partners in Kenya.
Great, thank you for that. All fantastic examples of communities being, demonstrating their leadership and taking initiatives forward. Let's bring in, let's jump regions again. We're going to hear from Joel Aguila. Joel is one of the network coordinators of the Bicol region of the Homeless People's Federation of the Philippines. That's affiliated also to SDI, to Slum Dwellers International, and the Asian Coalition of Housing Rights. That's a federation, for those of you that aren't familiar with it, of urban poor that's been organizing slum dweller communities for more than 20 years to map settlements, upgrade housing, and work on basic services for the poor and manage disaster risk and climate change adaptation. Joel is a committed community organizer and advocate for pro-poor housing and urban development in the Philippines, and we are very happy to have him with us today. Joel, could you tell us a little bit about the work of the Federation and what you have done to deal with how you address climate change in your region, and also focus on the partnership aspects of local government? Over to you.
Hello, good evening to everyone. In Bicol region, empowering community savings program play as a great tools in dealing with the effect of climate change. In fact, currently in 2020, November, the province of Albay also devastated of Typhoon Ruli. The savings programs is the main tools of the Federation in dealing with the effect of climate change. Through savings community, they can afford to purchase safe land for settlement. And also for the partnership in the government, we registered the local organization and the Security Exchange Commission for the legality and do the accreditation to the local government. And that way, we can have set and voice for the local and city development council. Also, the community savings program is our tools to empower the women and the association itself.
Thank you for that, Joel. So you're hearing the importance of savings programs. Can you talk a little bit about how you are all dealing with the COVID-19 pandemic as well?
Yeah, in the time of height of pandemic, the community was discouraged to have meetings, but with the federation, they give some support for the relief goods, and also they give some seeds for the vegetables so that the community can ensure for the easiness of their emotion, and also for the insurers to have food in their tables through planting vegetables in their backyards.
Great. And have you found that Saranjan in the chat has raised the point of building partnerships and local governments trusting communities to distribute resources on behalf of government and other partners? Has that worked well in your region?
Yeah, in the Bicol region, the government also gives some support for the communities for the relief goods, and also they also give some vegetables to support the foods for the tables of the communities. And aside of that, the government also provide 4.6 million pesos for the concreting of the community's road for the easiness of access of those support goods.
Excellent, thank you. I am not seeing any, okay, I see one question in the chat. So there's a question on Kenya that's saying that it seems to be way ahead of valuing local knowledge and developing decentralized climate laws. I mean, Kenya has been decentralizing for some time now. So I think there's been huge progress there. And the question is there any coordination between this two or three happen in isolation? This is the heart of my research. I'm not understanding the question actually. For highlighting the importance of local indigenous knowledge and technologies that are critical for responsive policy development.
Valuing local knowledge and developing decentralized climate laws. Are those two connected, or are they happening in isolation?
Okay, thank you, Claire, for the translation. Nancy, I hope you heard the question, or Violet, do either of you want to address that question? Violet or Nancy? Go ahead, Violet.
Yeah, thank you. I'll put off my video so that I don't get disconnected.
Okay.
Okay, so what I want to talk about how Kenya is advancing in decentralized climate change resources is that, you know, in Kenya, we have a devolved government system where we have 47 counties. And these 47 counties have put up their own climate change implementation plan. As much as we have the national implementation plan, each of the county draws from this plan to come up with their implementation plan. So it's from this that the counties mobilize resources that they are able to work on climate change activities. We still have gaps because I see it on one of such our Kakamega County, and we still have limitations because most of the money that the county government is using to implement activities related to that is not money from the county, is money from other partners. And Margaret, I'm sorry to say that one of the partners here in Kakamega is World Bank. And sometimes the restrictions that come with that money around what kind of activities they can fund, and like if grassroots women in an organized group want to get this money, or any organized group, how they are limited because of the regulations and the protocols around this, which is not just protocols, but some things are not actually very, very real, in like saying you must show you have land for food security activities, you must demonstrate you have land that reads that name. And you know, as grassroots women, we work on our individual land, but we work as a collective. So our group is the main resource that we have. And when we work in our land, we replicate even in other lands. The only thing we put in place is like a demonstration learning center, which still belongs to one of the members, for example. And we trust ourselves with that. And this is what we have been working and showcasing our innovations from. But usually most of this money do not come to really complement what communities are doing. They come in a way of really very different plans that doesn't really support the work that we are doing on the ground. So this is something that we are still fighting on by showing, like the tool that I showed, we can lease land for several years for this project in a community to demonstrate how we can address issues of climate change, but we are still in a way of negotiating. That's why we want to formalize some of these processes. Like for us, we are now, like today, I was seated the whole day doing letters because we have a roundtable meeting with the Minister for Lands, the Minister for Agriculture, to show them the land governance system that we are putting in place that can be able to help women especially to access land for agriculture productivity. So once it's adopted by the county in the legal framework, then it can be funded through that way. So those are some of the things that we are doing to really show this can work, make it a policy. But before it's a policy, it's very hard to convince them before it's in the legal recommendation. So it's a process that I believe in community organizing. I also believe that community being able to articulate this form of governance and being able to really challenge the systems, but with solutions. The solution has been able to work on a larger scale. Like for us, we started in 2 wards, we are in 7 wards, so we can actually say, see how this is being replicated even in other wards. And yeah.
Thank you, Violet. Thanks a lot for that. And no apologies necessary. Everyone is free to criticize the World Bank. We're also an organization that is learning as we go, and we've been supporting the devolution process for a number of years, and adjusting and learning as we go. And actually, this might be, I know there's a question for Joelle that I'll come back to, but I want to maybe expand, since we're on the topic of Kenya, bring in Claire and Heather and Sheila. Let me introduce them first, but I think Claire can address some of the things on the sort of devolved climate finance and deepening the devolution and engagement process on that. So let me quickly introduce them. We have Heather McGray. We're very happy to have Heather here. She has served as the director of the Climate Justice Resilience Fund since its inception in 2016. The CJRF makes grants to support women, to support youth and indigenous peoples to create and share climate solutions. And she was also previously at WRI for a number of years. Thanks for joining us, Heather. And Claire is the director of IIED's Climate Change Research Group, and she has over 25 years of experience in development in climate, energy, and natural resources. And prior to that was with DFID for another 15 years, and leading the integration of climate change thinking into DFID's what are you called now? FCDO's development interventions in Asia and Africa. So we're really happy to have both of you with us. Claire, do you want to reflect on some of what you heard and maybe share some information about the county climate change funds?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, what we've been hearing about the importance of a locally led response, because the poor really understand their context and what's needed, what is critical to build resilience from all the speakers to date. And that is what I think the opportunity is with the county within Kenya. They have been delivering this now for just within 5 counties, but it's going nationwide with support from the World Bank indeed. And the idea is that the counties have a climate change fund, that all the decisions around the investment under that fund, was 70% of that finance, is designed to be prioritized by ward committees. So the ward level is the closest local government level. They set up climate change committees with representatives from different groups within that ward, and including a representation from women and youth, and prioritize those investments. And I think what we've been hearing from Violet and Joel around how you wouldn't necessarily, as an external expert, make the decisions that are being made locally if you were trying to address some of the vulnerabilities being experienced within communities. But when communities themselves are able to set out what they understand to be the fundamental driver of vulnerability, they begin to come up with very innovative changes. So as Violet was talking about, those land lease guidelines being adopted by the county government, that's made possible by these types of approaches where you build engagement between the communities and the county government over time, building that trust and building a shared understanding of actually how to tackle the underlying drivers of the vulnerability and start to build resilience. Yeah, I mean, the other things just to note around a lot of the speakers were talking about the sort of what we would be calling in IIED the whole of society, the value of citizen engagement, and we've seen that really beautifully brought out in responses to the COVID-19 stories we just heard. We're hearing from Nereide about collective strategies, Nancy about the credibility that is built by collecting information and informing government, how to tackle flooding, but also how to tackle COVID response. And I think what's really interesting also is that, you know, where you have networks that have organized communities, there's much greater trust between the individuals, the households, and those networks that have grown from their own community. So in a situation like COVID-19, I can imagine that the outreach on public health around washing hands, about keeping distance, about wearing masks, would have been a lot more effective than perhaps it has been in, say, the UK, where it's come from central government and people have been saying, but why do we have to do this? We don't really believe the government's advice. So I think there's some, so the sort of devolving the climate finance is all about getting the resources, devolving the agency and the resources down to the most local level possible, and engaging communities in more effective and more sustainable investments for resilience.
Great, thank you, Claire. And yeah, Claire mentioned that the County Climate Change Fund model is being scaled up. I'm part of that program to working on that directly. And I think I've been really, you know, it's the Ministry of Finance of Kenya has really seen the value of this approach. And so they, you know, while it started in, you know, a small handful of counties, they're really bought into the model of just what Claire said, of devolving the finance and the agency down to the local level. So hopefully Violet will address some of the issues she raised. Let me first go to Heather. I think we're doing really well on time, by the way. We have still 40 minutes for discussion. We've gotten through sort of all the formal presentations. So let me bring in Heather, and then I'll go back to our panelists for a couple of the questions. Heather, let's hear from you on your some of the reflections of what you've heard, and maybe your role as an intermediary at the foundation, and how you see supporting these the grassroots efforts. Over to you.
Sure, thanks, Margaret. Can you hear me clearly? Am I coming through?
It sounds a bit low. I can make out what you're saying, but I don't know if anyone else.
No, it's a bit muffled. It's a bit muffled.
A little bit better?
A little bit.
Okay. I'm sorry, everyone. I do have pretty erratic audio, but I haven't been able to get here. I really appreciate all the remarks that we've gotten to hear today. And if hearing me is really getting difficult, why don't you go back to someone else, Margaret, and I will fiddle with this a little bit, maybe come in on my phone instead. Is that okay? I'm seeing you with your hand on your ear. That might be smart.
Okay, all right, let's do that. So there was a question for Joel. Joel, the question to you was, how do you make sure that the group members that you're supporting, that your organization is supporting and are benefiting from the programs are empowered, so not to be you know, aid dependent, remain on the receiving end, but be able to sustain themselves in the future. So it's a question about sustainability of your efforts.
The Federation discouraged all-out mentality. So we always encourage community to have their counterpart within the community to ensure that they will not rely on outside support. And we will build partnership with the government so that even project consume is still trust and partnership will last and strong in the community.
Thank you. Thanks for that response. Violet, there was also a question for you about how you protect grassroots community initiatives from corruption that is in existence in systems and that can take advantage of vulnerable community opportunities? How do you protect against corruption? Violet?
That's why.
Sorry. Yeah, so one is my organization, Shibuya Community Health Workers, is the convener for civil society, 11 civil society groups that work in the western region of Kenya, which we call our sons. This is because we realized that most of the institutions that working with people from the local communities, especially corrupt and lacked accountability. So we came together to demonstrate what transparency and accountability really means, including accountability in resources, and even being very clear when we attend government meetings, for example, if these meetings are about discussing budgets or discussing development plans, the amount of time we get to be able to interact in this meeting or space, or are we going to these meetings just to go and sign the participant list? So we were very clear on what things are we going to term as lack of accountability. When we are invited to meetings and we don't have time to interact, we are just called to listen, and then we sign participant lists. Everyone, our members will say, we will not sign the participant list. Give us this document to go and discuss on our own, or give us an expert to sit with us. Then we can sign to show that we participated, because we were promoting what we call citizen participation that was put in our devolution. So we have really been enhancing that, and we stand with that. And on the other side of resources, we are very clear that when we get like any resources that come, whether it's resource in kind or resource in money, there has to be a clear explanation, because like most of these, like the devolved funding that you have been hearing, sometimes does not come in cash. It comes in equipment that the farmers want. It comes in like trainings and whatever. So we always want to be part of making the plan, which we have really lobbied for that, and ensure we understand how much resource is allocated to our groups or the groups or smaller groups that may not be having a voice. Because of the networking, we have the mature groups mentor the other groups or stand in and work with the groups to understand how much resources is allocated, how much is going to buying the equipment, including scouting, to know how much these equipments really cost, so that when the equipment comes, they can say, we don't want to buy it here. If you're buying for us, buy it here because it's fair, or it's this good quality or whatever. So that is how we have been able to actually address issues of corruption in how we interact in partnership. And just fostering what meaningful partnership is. Sorry, I am in a home and you can sorry, someone is coming with chicken that is making. Sorry, I'm so sorry. This is the real scenario.
Local voices, it's fine. It's okay, Violet, we can still hear you.
So, yeah, so, no, it's my chicken that I think had gone out of the fence, so someone is trying to rescue. That's another lack of so, what we do is we stand the principle of meaningfulness and is it partnership where You just attend meetings, or is it partnership where there is full understanding of the kind of projects that you want to implement together? Thank you.
Thank you, Violet. Thank you very much. Let's go. I think Heather has improved her audio, her microphone. Can we go back to you, Heather, for your reflections?
Yes, thanks, Margaret. Does this sound a little better?
Oh, excellent. Yeah.
Okay, good. Well, thanks very much for this chance to reflect. I really appreciated the chance to hear from these speakers today. At the Climate Justice Resilience Fund, our primary insight is that the people who are hit first by climate change are the first to respond and the first to adapt. And we want to be in the business of supporting those processes, of providing grants that help organizations, help communities really make that response as strong as possible, and then share the solutions and share the lessons, whether that's through policy or through networks or through other mechanisms. As I listened to some of the speakers today, a couple things I thought I would highlight in terms of what solutions look like and what kinds of things really benefit from support. One is that in almost all the cases we heard, information is a really powerful thing. And we hear about communities gathering data and partnering with researchers in order to be able to bring solution sets powerfully to their governments and begin building those relationships with governments that can be so powerful and impactful down the road. And I wanted to raise up that thread there. Secondly, something we see all over the world and which I heard in many of the speaker stories today again is that there's this really important link between economic empowerment and political empowerment. And several speakers spoke about savings programs, for example, and the kinds of very basic community economic investment that leads to conversations with government. It leads to confidence and organization and cohesiveness amongst communities in ways that really have very far-reaching effects. This is often, as noted by Margaret and others, a pretty long-term investment agenda, and I think that's another lesson to pull here. And, you know, in terms of COVID, I did want to mention COVID for a second, and it's been such a lesson for all of us in resilience and what resilience means and what it is, not only for a health impact like this, but for the economic impacts that come along with the health impact, and then lessons for us going down the road in terms of resilience to climate change. What we see all over the world, and again in so many of the speakers' stories today, is that the core of resilience is people helping their neighbors after a problem, after a storm or a disease, or, you know, in the midst of the economic turmoil that we've seen. This is the core of resilience, and people at the community level really are the first to respond. The more organized they can be, the more they have support from outside their communities, the more effective that resilience response is. And on some level, this is very simple, but I think for those of us who work as funders and maybe have more of an impact at a global level, it's easy to forget this somehow, that fundamentally this is about people helping their neighbors. So when we see how effective that response can be, and some of the very simple things that organizations like Violet's or Nancy's or Joel's have been doing to strengthen that response, we see a real need for building voice and building power at that level. And so that's a core function for us as an intermediary, is to be targeting that kind of simple but very profound link between near-term action, voice and power for the long term. And I really just appreciate so many of the examples that we've seen today that illustrate that.
Thank you, Heather. Thanks for those reflections. And I think some of the points really that you raised also really resonate with me, as you know, I'm a practitioner in the World Bank, and thinking about you know, a couple of the more recent you know, we put out a lot of reports at the bank. The latest one on reducing poverty and shared prosperity, called Reversals of Fortune, talks about the 3 C's of what is really going to prevent us from eliminating extreme poverty by 2030. And it's COVID, climate, and conflict, right? And if you think about all of these, underlying all of this are these underlying causes, and they're social issues, right? The climate crisis is a social crisis, not an environmental crisis. I mean, it is an environmental crisis, but it's also a social crisis. COVID is a social crisis. We've seen, you know, all of these, the impacts of risk are determined by power relations and racism and discrimination and marginalization. And now we're, you know, they're projecting that we'll have well over 100 million more people in extreme poverty due to COVID now, at compounding all these other risks. And that's unacceptable. I mean, this is the first, you know, sort of the first reversal of this we've had since 1998. And then another report I was just reviewing from our evaluations department really looked at how the bank has to do better of really, I mean, in a nutshell, looking at the relationship between people and planet, right? That even when we're looking at, that we haven't done enough around, when we're looking at sort of forest conservation, we tend to try and, like, you know, engage communities to protect the forest, but we're not looking at the symbiotic relationship between natural resources and people and their well-being. So all of what the speakers have said about bringing Indigenous knowledge and the relationship with our environment. So sort of those 2 things stick in my mind. So, you know, we need to do, I think we need to do, we need to be, you know, better at moving through these different spaces. And focusing more, I think, not on just technical approaches, because they're never going to be enough, but looking at all of these process and engagement issues, as you pointed out. I want to bring in, we were sort of saving her for last, but I just want to bring her into the conversation now. Sheila Patel, who probably needs no introduction, but I will introduce her anyway. Sheila is the founder and director of the Society for Promotion of Area Resource Centers, SPARC, that has been working since 1984 to support community organizations of the urban poor in their efforts to access secure housing and basic amenities and seek their right to the city. She's also a founder member and former chair of the board of SDI, and she's also a commissioner of the Global Adaptation Commission. So Sheila, before I go back to our grassroots panelists for a couple of other questions, I want to bring you in for your reflections on what you've heard, what you would take back to the adaptation summit that's happening in January, and your fellow commissioner members. Over to you, Sheila.
Thanks, Margaret. I've been watching and listening and very excited at this conversation. For me, my own journey as a grassroots activist working in urban areas led us to this thing of sustained, aggregated networks that had voices globally but acted locally. It's such a pithy word to say, no? Act globally, act locally and think globally. But the challenge is that all kinds of vulnerable communities, urban and rural, face today is intergenerational neglect of formal systems, to be inclusive, to consider them as fellow citizens. And this has created such a huge divide that the stories that you are hearing from members of SDI and the Huairou Commission, and I have heard this from so many urban and rural groups, that unless you are a social movement, unless you develop the stamina and the capacity to survive the development investment that is project driven for 2 to 3 years, you cannot produce sustained benefits for your own neighborhoods. And so what each one of them have been saying is that despite the externalities, these organizations were formed, they networked each other, they produced trust, they produced capacity, and they began to demand things from their duty bearers to comply with common sense, simple things that work for the poor. So whether you take what Violet said about land, or you took what Nancy said about the SPA. She said SPA, some of you may not know, it's in cities when a particular area does not seem to be sorted out by traditional planning systems, you create a special planning zone and you explore new ways of addressing the needs of that area. And it's a global landmark that the Muungano, of which Nancy is a part of, was asked by the first the governor and then the Metropolitan Authority of Nairobi to design their own neighborhoods, which has about 100,000 families living there. And what you have coming out of these simple, humble rituals that all 4 of them spoke about, which is gathering people to understand their needs, to aggregate their knowledge, to explore what works for them, and then to make a representation. In each case, they have produced really disruptive new ways of addressing generational problems. And I think that formal institutions, starting from the United Nations, the World Bank, our commission, the whole climate change family, the SDGs, we have to go away from believing that professionals sitting in global institutions are going to do modeling that's going to solve the world. It hasn't done it so far. But solutions that poor people take up through their networks and through amplification, through alignments with organizations and networks that even you, Margaret, represent as a practitioner in the World Bank. You're our person in the bank. So what it does is you create, what all of us have been doing is to create new partnerships with institutions and organizations who are not like us. They are not social movements. They're institutions that have different skill sets. And the trust relationship then produces a new form of scaling up that's there. I also want to make a special reference to our federation in the Philippines and the work that Joel has done. In our network, in STI, the Filipinos were the first organization in our network that actually did detailed surveys of households who were displaced by floods or by, they have a lot of these ash rains that come in, or all kinds of things. And what they did was they actually produced documentation of where people lived and created a collective testimony that demanded that the government give them support. We all know that during the tsunami and during all these large cyclones and things like that, the poorest people lost out completely because they didn't have the documentation that was needed. And so all these stories that we have heard have aggregated their networks. They have produced a legitimation which is internal. and they have produced solutions that they can scale up. So in my privilege as being a commissioner, it's been both exciting but very difficult to invade the conventional space of a top-down hierarchy and architecture, in which, with the best of intentions, everything on the ground is seen as a cookie cutter. And therefore, if we are able to, and I think both the Huairou Commission and SDI have worked very closely with you, Margaret, with Claire at IIED, and with Heather. We're trying to say, what's the new architecture in designing innovations, in scaling up innovations, in learning from each other, which will produce a new role for communities, not as consumers and beneficiaries of development, but active central drivers of change. And I think that that's how all of us have come to the Climate Change Party. We used to do different things in different sectors, and now we see that across the board, climate has become the single most important force that can destroy everything that we're doing. And COVID is a very good example that shows that something that happened in some village somewhere in a matter of months became a global pandemic. Our governments didn't know what to do. We didn't know what to do. The medical fraternity didn't know what to do. But those people who were organized, those relationships which were of trust, worked together, solving small problems, leading to bigger dialogues and negotiations. So I think that for us, the fact that adaptation has begun to play a significant role in the climate change space is very welcome, because we just don't believe that governments and big businesses are going to change the world. We are all people who are, whether we like it or not, collectively have the capacity to produce opinions of what's right and wrong, what organizations should and should not do. And we have to exercise that right in a world which is increasingly defranchising more and more people. So the climate produces new bridges for collective exploration. And I think those are the alliances that we all are looking for. So all of you in the audience, if you don't know any of us, reach out to us. If you think there's things we can do together, all of us who are speaking today and we're all trying to bring our own strengths into this process. And we'd like all of you to join this party. Back to you, Margaret.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Sheila. Yeah, and I think your message of really the need for movements, right? We've all been saying that this is very long-term stuff. I've been at the World Bank for 25 years, and I feel like I've been working on the same thing over these 25 years, and it's just been repackaged. And first it was the disaster space and the climate space, and now it's COVID. But it's all the same thing, right? It's all the same issue we're dealing with. So these generational problems, I think, and that's my frustration, is that, as a social development specialist, we're always advising our colleagues to say, hey, these things take time, invest in conversations and engagement of communities. Don't tell them what they need to do, ask them how you can help them do what they know to do, and that takes time. But the urgency is there, right? So how do we balance this? So what I'd like to do now in the about 10 minutes we have remaining is go back to all of our initial panelists who are community leaders, and ask them that question about dealing with these intergenerational issues, your reflections on that on a way forward. And I will start with Nereide. And Nereide, I'd also be interested, if you want to, if you could also address the issue of just gender roles and traditional roles in your region. If you've seen any, because we've talked a lot about grassroots women's leadership and their role in the community and how that builds broader resilience. If you want to reflect on the gender dimensions, if you've seen changes in gender roles over time during your work, please reflect on that as well. So we'll go to our grassroots panelists, and I'll go back to Heather and Claire, and we'll then give Sheila the last word. Nereide, over to you.
Nereide. Mandé y yo voy a...
La primera o la segunda pregunta? Sí, yo te encaminé en el chat. Acá. Usted puede hacer la pregunta. Haga la pregunta.
Nereide, I'm just going to say the question in Spanish to Nereide.
La pregunta, la primera.
Okay.
Yes, thank you, Margaret.
Nereide, ¿me escucha, Nereide? Nereide, ¿me escuchas?
Sí, sí.
La pregunta era que cómo usted ve a sus recomendaciones, visiones para enfrentar esos problemas de generaciones, ¿no? Que son de término muy largo. Y la segunda pregunta, si quieres, no tienes que hacerlo, pero si usted ha visto cambios en los roles de género pasando el tiempo con el trabajo que ha hecho. Las dos preguntas.
También. La primera pregunta yo puedo
decir
el siguiente. La responsabilidad de ser experimentadora y buscar tecnología y garantizar innovación de las mujeres.
For women
porque los hombres
has been very difficult because women,
tiempo, because
men don't have the time
garantizar la producción para poder
to invest in women's issues, so we have to do it ourselves.
Garantizar lo alimento, la cesta básica.
We have to guarantee the food.
Não tiene tiempo. Então, o que se percebeu durante todo el tiempo que
so what we have seen through time is that women are the ones that look for alternatives and solutions.
Com las generaciones, com el tiempo, pasándose los 30 años que yo hablé, los jóvenes quieren volver en sus casas y sus tierras, pero ahora nosotros tenemos que avanzar mucho más con nuevas políticas públicas, con nuevos trabajos, porque hoy no tenemos la tierra, tenemos la tecnología, el conocimiento de la tecnología, pero con mucho custo para nosotros empezar nuevamente, todo de nuevo.
Ok, entonces, bueno, lo que hemos aprendido es que para las mujeres es muchísimo más difícil crear estas innovaciones porque han sido los hombres los que han liderado este proceso. Entonces, lo que a veces los hombres consigan en un periodo de tiempo más pequeño para nosotras, por ejemplo, en este caso que ella les habló, se llevó 30 años en poder crear realmente sistemas. I am so sorry. I got confused. So,
sorry, I didn't realize myself. I should have said
las mujeres que hacen las innovaciones, los hombres no, después viene después. No, primero son las mujeres.
So she's talking about how women are the ones that make the innovations because they are the ones that actually satisfy the needs for the families. So sometimes men don't really have the time to create, for example, water harvesting systems. So women since they are the ones that need water in the house to bathe their children, to cook, to clean, they are the ones that create systems to improve their livelihoods. And then men come and use these improvements and sometimes even get the credits of it. So this is kind of difficult, but we realize that women and grassroots women do a lot of work of the hard work creating new technologies to improve livelihoods in the communities. Thank you. Gracias, Nereide. ¿Algo más?
Gracias. No, yo solo quería acrescentar que los jóvenes quieren, si se tiene está pronto, la tecnología está bien, son los primeros a poner en práctica. Mas eles querem tudo, você diz, redondo em português, tudo pronto. Acá a tecnologia, acá a produção, acá se hace assim. Então, eles fazem e põem em prática, mas eles querem ganhar, ter a garantia que possa realmente fazer o desenvolvimento a partir do conhecimento.
Okay. So she's talking about how youth is so important in this subject because we have to teach youth that they have to understand problems, investigate them, and find solutions for them, because sometimes they want things to happen like very fast and suddenly, and they need to take the time to create the systems to improve their livelihoods and not just expect for other people to create them and then just use them. So it is very important to improve the capabilities of the young people to be able to do this as we elder people have done it. Thank you very much. Muchísimas gracias, Nereide.
Thank you. Gracias, Nereide. Thank you. So let's continue on to, and there was a comment in the chat, and I think Nereide addressed it also, about engaging youth. So I'll go, because I want to go around to everyone and then give Sheila the last word. So Joel, I would like to go to you. Can you address this question of the intergenerational issues and how you're engaging youth?
Yeah, here in the Philippines, women's empowerment is so great in movement. The community leaders comprise of 70% are all women, and also the sensitivity and gender are also implemented in the federations. So even the third gender are also part of the leaders in the community.
Thank you. Thank you, Joel. Let's go back to our friends in Kenya, and then I'll go back to Claire and Heather. Nancy, do you want to give us any final reflections on the sort of intergenerational issues in that perspective?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
As the Kenyan Federation, what we are doing, we are really engaging the youth.
I can't hear Nancy. I don't know if you're.
You can't hear? Can you hear me? Hello?
I can hear her. Do you hear her? Because maybe
I hear you fine, Nancy.
Oh, sorry.
You can hear me?
Yeah, you carry on, Nancy.
I can hear you,
So,
Nancy, now. Sorry.
As the Kenyan Muungano Alliance, what we are doing is to bringing up the new tires in the federation so that they can continue with the work of the federation. So what we do, we have a youth program where we recruit youth from the settlement to join in our savings groups. So this is giving.
I can't hear Nancy.
You can't hear?
If you can't hear Nancy, you're probably on the wrong interpretation channel. That's what happened to me. Turn the interpretation off. Nancy, please go ahead.
Now you can hear me?
Yes.
I turn to English. Now you can hear me?
Yes, yes, you're okay.
Yes.
So I was saying, like the Kenyan Federation, what we are doing is mobilizing the youth. We have a youth program where we mobilize the youth into integrating into our saving groups. So we have activities for the youth. Basically, they are the ones who document all our activities. We have a KYC TV program. They document all the processes in the settlement. when we are doing mapping, or when we are doing intervention, visiting the county governments. They are the ones who document, and by documenting the experience, the life, and experience the advocacy, which basically we are doing.
Excellent, thank you. Violet, you want to add anything on any last words on the sort of longer term intergenerational issues engaging youth? Or any final words?
Like for us, we realized a very big gap in how youth are involved in agricultural activities. And in rural communities where we don't have livelihoods, agriculture stands up to be the most livelihood that anyone can be able to access. And one of the reasons why youth were not engaging in agricultural activity so that they can also participate in activities like soil rehabilitation and management and irrigative agriculture was because they didn't have land. So the tool which I was showing you really shows the concept of why we are advancing land lease guidelines or land governance, because we want to see youth and women accessing land because they are in the same group when it comes to the vulnerability of accessing land for agricultural activities. So because of that, we also wanted to demonstrate in the 2 wards where we had started streamlining land governance. We demonstrated by giving youth equipment for irrigation from our CJRF resources that we got. We also gave youth, linked the youth to agricultural extension officers for training the forest department so that they would do tree parking. And we actually brought the government there in one of the field days to see how youth and women were working together to advance agriculture after accessing land, because we wanted it to build the basis of setting our argument in the county on why land governance has to be a process that will favor everyone in the community. So we have youth activities right now with very strong, they're the ones doing bulking. They are even the ones helping us to do like short videos. They help us to do, because some of them had come out of school and did not have any connection with anyone. They were just idle in the communities. Some were getting engaged in very criminal activities. But now at least working with women is like working with their mothers and getting mentorship on even the indigenous way of farming. So we work very well with them.
Wonderful, thank you, Violet. I'm gonna go quickly because we need to close to Heather and then to Claire for any quick final reflections. Heather?
Sure, just 2 quick things from me. One on the question of youth. This has been really interesting as a funder to find ways to support youth and the amazing youth movement that's underway right now on climate change. I think it's actually quite different in different places around the world in terms of what youth are looking for and what they need. But I really appreciate the approach that Violet just shared around pulling youth into whatever you happen to be doing and finding the appropriate way in that particular place. The other thing I wanted to note is that, I mean, in many cases, it's not a matter of adults building capacity of youth or engaging youth. It's really the other way around. And actually one of the youth grantees one of the youth organizations that we've made grants to is holding a parallel session right now in this very Development Climate Days that really, well, I know is just fantastic and has inspired a lot of people in its previous iteration. The second thing I just wanted to emphasize is something that's come up in a lot of remarks today, and that's the question of trust. As funders, we're a really big part of the trust issue, and figuring out how to work together to build trust and then build on trust is something that I think is a niche for intermediaries like the CJRF and IIED. And it's something that really deserves attention and very intentional learning. I think there's a lot of elements of it that we all think of as sort of magical or just natural, and maybe that's true, but maybe there are some things we could really turn a more explicit learning eye on and distill out. So thank you everyone for the chance to be part of this today and for sharing all of your insights.
Thanks a lot, Heather. Thanks for joining us. And I think your point about the youth teaching us is also very important. I've also been very encouraged, I think, by all the movement around Black Lives Matter and the the police brutality and anti-racism protests and movement here in the U.S. and sort of trusting in the next generation that with all the activity going on. Claire, over to you for any final words.
Yeah, so gosh, what an amazing discussion we've been having. I feel like I've got too much to say, but there'll be a lot I'll be taking away from this. I think there are opportunities in the run up to the climate talks, COP26, because they're setting a new long-term target for climate finance. But at the same time, recognizing that a lot of actors are saying, hey, we haven't had access to the first lot of finance. There's been too little for adaptation, there's been too little for the poorest countries, and there's been far too little for the communities that are most affected. So one of the lessons I think we've learned is that magic bullets invented by distant experts don't work. So the sort of expert-led approach to resilience just cannot predict the myriad ways that communities can organize themselves and respond to different shocks. We need to move away from that type of model in adaptation, but as others have said, resilience, we're learning as much from COVID-19 as we have from climate shocks. And this requires solving a problem for the donors, what they call their aggregation problem. They don't have the administration capability to parcel out lots of small amounts of funding, but it's also about solving that challenge of trust between the different actors in the system. We've been developing something that is now called the locally led adaptation principles with many of the people in this call. And that's trying to pull out some of the things that really help communities begin to transform their lives, transform their livelihoods, and increase the opportunities available to them. And it's exactly about this needing to invest now in growing the institutions for the future. Developing mechanisms where you can devolve agency and resources down to the local level with clear governance rules that everyone's comfortable with, where communities can see the transparency that Violet was talking about, for example. There's a principle around tackling that structural exclusion that is faced by women, by younger people, on the basis of your ability or disability, your ethnicity. It's about building that future institutional legacy. So investing now in the leaders of tomorrow, whether those are women or youth, to correct for those participation inequalities that we were hearing about earlier, and making, as Nereide called for, much longer term timeframes for investment. Nereide was talking about 30 years. I'm not sure we'll get donors investing for 30 years from the start, but at least 7 years, at least 10 years. And trying to build that trust through really radical transparency, where it's as much about social audits where communities say, yeah, this worked, it made a difference, we got the resources we needed at the time we needed it for the things that we needed. So we've got things coming out about that over the next weeks, but these principles, 8 principles, we hope we'll begin to build a movement around them, and we're very much behind Sheila's leadership, as well as Dr. Musa, who's the head of BRAC, who have been really championing this under the commission. And there are some really promising things. I mean, the SDI and Huairou Commission themselves are effectively acting as aggregation mechanisms where they can get finance, if given finance at the centre, can get finance down to those local partners very quickly, their membership. So accelerating support for growing those types of frontline funds, but also new forms of partnership. And we were talking earlier about the County Climate Change Fund in Kenya, which the World Bank will be supporting. That's made up of, at the county level, loads of partnerships with local organisations and with the communities. Or the ADB is setting up something they're calling Community Resilience Partnership Programme, which again is about trying to invent partnerships that are vertically connected, so that from global to national to local, as well as horizontally, growing the numbers of organised communities that can engage and begin to drive resilience. So although it's been a challenging year, I think we've learnt a lot, and just hearing the range of experience, it feels like we are beginning to move in a sort of shared road to really try and tackle this for the future, and not trying to solve it all with a very clever idea tomorrow, but trying to get the institutions that can be agile and respond to these challenges into the long term. Thanks.
Great, thank you so much, Claire. That's really excellent closing remarks. I'm going to give Sheila the last word, please. Can you close us out, Sheila?
Margaret, can you hear me? Because I can't hear you. I'm just reading the text, which is telling me that you handed it over to me.
You may
so
be,
anyway, without losing much
on the
time,
wrong channel,
because we should close now. Everybody said a lot and there's no need to repeat anything, but I want to say a couple of things. Trust doesn't come overnight, and it doesn't come out of saying you must trust me. It comes out of doing things together, learning to depend on each other, and believing that each person is trying to do something that will help the other. We don't have those relationships in development, and we have to create them. The second issue is that we all celebrate success, but development is a very risky business, and everybody has a right to fail. You know, the first thing I learned from my community network leadership is to say, you know, researchers can fail, governments can fail, but the poor can't fail, because if you fail, you don't get a second chance. And I think somewhere in our development partnerships, we have to hold the hands of people who failed to understand why they failed, what frailty produced that, and how can that be repaired, instead of abandoning somebody or saying that they have lied, cheated, and stolen. Because poor people's lives are always outside the legal framework. You talk about corruption. There are no groups in the world that are forced to pay bribes and pay way beyond what they should than the urban poor. So I think these are all lessons in humility that we all need if we want a real partnership. And I think that one of the things that all social movements strive to do is to change the way in which mainstream global institutions conceive of organizing. Right now, some professional will be sent to organize a community, to do immunization, to grow new seeds, to do this, to do that. Then the project is over, it's said to be good, you tie the package and you post it saying it worked well. You go there 3 years later, you can't see any legacy. These are things we all have to change together. There was also the whole discussion that was just touched upon about Black Lives Matter. In each and every one of our countries and and cities, there are different forms of exclusion. When Indians went to South Africa and saw apartheid, we felt our caste system is like apartheid. It's a 10,000-year-old institutionalized system. So everywhere this is there, and we have to take advantage of looking at how we breach those things. But I think one of the things which Claire mentioned, and I want to add to that, is the paradox that all money that is meant to serve very poor communities, actually very little is allocated, and even that is not utilized. You have so much unutilized money that is said that it cannot be absorbed. And so we say that the instrument is wrong and not the question of absorption. And so all of us sitting in different places have to view these things and understand that. And Claire, the work that you and your team have done on money where it matters is seminal in looking at these issues and looking at processes like that. And so we really welcome the ADB's really courageous move. It's a very traditional, otherwise known in Asia as a conservative bank. But to have brought Huairou Commission and community networks into planning resilience is an amazing breakthrough. And we hope that other regional banks also do that. But finally, and most importantly, the question is, when do all of us as representatives of grassroots networks and movements demand a seat at the table where major decisions are taken? Because the face of one of us sitting on those tables changes the narratives of how poor people are reflected or discussed about. And I think all of us sitting here today have to ensure that if not we, the people that we mentor, the young people we mentor, will not just knock on doors, they will break down those doors and demand a seat on the table. So we have very high hopes for all the young people who are there. And thank you very much. Thank you, Margaret, and all my colleagues who are speakers, and Heather and Claire, and all of you, Anvesha and Suranjana and others who've been, Ariana, who've been working on this. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Sheila. Those are really inspirational words to close on. Thank you, Claire and Heather and Joel and Nancy and Nereide and Violet. To all the organizers, this has been a really rich discussion. Let's continue to build and support those movements in the next generation, and you know, do it well, but do it quickly. So onwards. Thank you so much for all the participation. Have a great day and a great rest of the conference. Bye, everyone.
Bye. Thank you so much.
Muchas gracias. Gracias.
Thank you everyone.